And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this special edition episode of the Assembly Call. I am your host, Jared Morris. I will be joined tonight by Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. The whole crew is here to talk IU basketball. And so that special guest that I promised in the email blast this morning, it may happen. We're not sure. Like, there literally may be a special guest popping in. It may not happen. If it doesn't happen, then we'll probably do an interview with that person at a later date. But as you can imagine, it's very hard to get Bob Knight to agree to come on an episode. He struggles fumbling around with the Google Hangout, so it's been kind of difficult. But anyway, we're really excited to be here. A lot of you, after Yogi made his announcement recently, asked us when are we doing another show, and we really appreciate that excitement and enthusiasm. And we wanted to do one as quickly as possible anyway, but certainly when you all are that excited about it, it gets us excited about it too. And so we're going to talk tonight about the 2015-16 Indiana season. We've spent a lot of the offseason speculating, who's going to stay, what's the roster going to look like. There's been all these questions, and now it feels like we finally have answers to a lot of those questions, which just leads to a lot of more questions, like, who's going to start and what will the expectations be? How will success be defined for this team that is clearly talented, but there's still a lot of pieces that have to fit together, a lot of improvements that have to be made over last year to get where we want to go. So we're going to talk about all of that tonight. We will begin with the banner moment, Ryan's rant, and the bottoms line here in a minute. I do want to just right off the bat, just say a few words about Hannah Wilson. Obviously, that was a horrible tragedy that happened in Bloomington. I know I speak on behalf of Ryan and Andy when I say that our thoughts, our prayers, our best wishes go out to the family. I can't fathom, what you go through in a situation like this, and certainly this is something that has happened far too often in Bloomington, and whatever is causing this, we have to find a way to stop it. It's just a horrible story. I do want to point you in one direction, and Chronic Hoosier tweeted this out a couple days ago, but the Pan-Hellenic Association of Indiana University has actually started a fund that is going to help Hannah's younger sister, Haley, who is planning on attending Indiana University next year. So I know in cases like this, especially when you're so far away from it, sometimes you just, you want to do something to help to show your support. And this is something you can do, which is donate to this fund, and I plan on doing it as well. But if you go to assemblycall.com/Hannah, it will redirect you to the URL. The URL is a bit long to just say, so just put assemblycall.com/Hannah, HANNAH, into your web browser. It'll redirect you there, and that gives you a way to support the family, because all of us who went to IU, who are from Bloomington, it feels like family, and it's just... Obviously, we were all heartbroken to see that story, and so just thoughts, prayers, and best wishes go out to the family. With that said, there's really no great way, I suppose, to transition into basketball talk, but that is why we're here, and that is what we will do, is talk IU basketball now. And we will begin this show like we begin every show. And I think when you talk about banner moments, it's pretty clear what the banner moment is, I think, for a lot of people, which is, Yogi announcing that he's coming back for senior year. And I would really extend that banner moment. It's really Yogi, Troy, and James Blackman Jr., three guys who all certainly could have left school and played professionally, whether they would have been drafted in the NBA or made it to the NBA right away. Who knows? But they are all three guys who did their due diligence, did their homework, got feedback from all the proper channels, and decided to come back. And obviously, in recent times, we've had a lot of guys leave who have done that. Noah Vonleh left, and Victor Oladipo and Cody Zeller left. The last time we really had a guy stay, Christian Watford, it was because, remember, before that 2013 season, there was talk of Christian leaving, and when he came back, it really set the stage for that big next season that was to come. And Indiana was a preseason #1, big-time expectations. Troy, James, and Yogi coming back isn't going to vault Indiana to #1, but it certainly has the Hoosiers in top 10, top 15 talk, and it has expectations raised. And so I think for a program that has really struggled with stability and keeping some of its more talented players in school for that extra year, that has happened. And you can just look up and down the roster and see all of the talent, see the ability, and now actually see some experience and guys that have played together. And so I think if you're looking for a reason to be optimistic that that sixth banner could be coming, I think those three guys coming back, providing continuity, providing leadership, certainly with their play and their talent, is really going to be, I think, big for this team this year and possibly moving forward as well. So that's my banner moment, my opening statement. Let's go around the horn and hear from the rest of the guys on the Assembly Call crew. Ryan, we will start with you and get your opening rant.
Well, if I had to pick a moment of the offseason, I think you're right that Yogi coming back was huge, but I don't even think that would have mattered if we didn't find a big guy, and IU certainly did that with Thomas Bryant. I think that was the moment of the offseason because, first of all, I think getting Thomas Bryant ensured that Yogi would come back because he didn't want to run a team of all guards anymore. He knows how valuable that inside presence is on both ends of the floor, defensively and offensively, and how important easy buckets are. I mean, this team, the offense this year, scored a lot of points, but a lot of times they were working for 30 seconds of that shot clock to get to that point. When you've got a guy like Bryant in the post, you can throw it down there, not worry, just let him turn around. You don't have to run a play. You don't have to back out and reset the offense too much. I mean, you just give it to him and let him go. And the other thing that Bryant provides is he runs the floor like a deer, like we're used to seeing with Cody Zeller. Noah Vonleh didn't really do that. He was more of a defensive presence, and he would get the ball in the set offense. Thomas Bryant's going to run the floor, and he's going to outrun a lot of defenses next year, especially in the Big Ten. You just don't see guys doing that these days, and it's a basic thing. You know, you'd think that that's the easiest thing to do. You want to get points as a big man, you run the floor. You will get the ball. Those guards will find you the ball. And for a team that likes to run fast, and these guys, it's going to stretch the floor. It's going to get easy. I mean, that could be an easy. You know, you talk about in the Big Ten in these close games and these tight battles, 6 to 8 points a game from a guy just hustling is invaluable. And then on top of that, you look at what he can do. Let's say he gets up the floor, gets it, doesn't have a shot. Well, then you've got all the trailers coming up with all the shooters, Blackman, Johnson, Yogi. I mean, it's the possibilities for the offense are endless. And I think it had a big impact on Yogi coming back. He knows that they can. That some of the pressure will be off of him, and he doesn't always have to find an answer. Sometimes he can give it to Bryant and let him work. And so I thought that Thomas Bryant agreeing to come to Indiana, committing and then finally signing that letter of intent was the biggest moment of this offseason, and I think that it's really that has raised the level of excitement among this fan base to levels we haven't seen in a while. So I think the combination of those two guys coming back is dynamite for Indiana, and I think that you don't get one without the other.
So you're saying Thomas Bryant will be a better option at center than Colin Hartman? Is that your controversial opinion?
I think that, I'm going to go ahead and go there. I know I'm going out on a limb. I'm reaching. Colin is such a physical presence down there, but no, I mean, it's transformative, and I'm sure we'll get into Thomas Bryant more, but It really is a transformative signing. It's a huge deal, and now you get a guy like Hunter Perea who can either play the 4, his more natural position, or you can go 4 guardish players and have Hunter coming off the bench and just rebounding and playing defense, and whatever you get from him offensively, hopefully he improves this offseason, but whatever you get from him is a bonus instead of, gosh, we need this guy to get 10, 12 points a game. It really does change the way things work, and the importance of a big man. We've harped on it all year, and getting Bryant, a guy who is a skilled big man, is a huge deal.
All right, so Andy, what is the bottom line then for this season's team to be as successful as everybody thinks it can be?
Well, I think perhaps the biggest story of the offseason thus far, and the greatest part, in my opinion, is Kentucky not finishing the season undefeated. So that can't.
That's right.
Can't go without mention.
I think we all predicted that would happen. By the way, we all they would lose once.
I did.
Had Wisconsin won the championship, I'd have been even more excited because I would have won about $400. But let's just leave that sit there for a little while. I'm clearly not bitter about it at all. I think for me, maybe the biggest story of the offseason is yet to be written, and it's really how these guys develop over the course of the offseason and how they improve, particularly on the defensive end. And I know that's something that, while team defense and those kinds of concepts are something that you want to work through as a group, and some of the summer work is a bit more individual. The issue with this team last year wasn't the ability to score. It was at times, and Bryant certainly provides another option to score inside in a way to roll out a much more conventional lineup. than what we saw really for the majority of last season. I think the question becomes, are we able to play conventional or at least tolerable defense? And I think that will really make or break things, because the offensive talent is there, the players are there to get everybody excited. And I think it's one that has a lot of likable guys on it and becomes really easy to get excited about. But when you look at where, outside of the personnel pieces, where things really need to change, improve, whatever, that really falls in the defensive end. And so I think, that to me is, we won't know the answer to that until things get started, next season, and we start to get into some of the non-conference schedule. But I do think, that's a key part of the offseason for me, is how these guys rally together, learn from the mistakes of last season, and really improve upon that, because we've seen some guys who have really been able to make large leaps from an individual skill standpoint. Oladipo is one that stands out a lot. Troy made some jumps. Yogi, and how he improved his shooting from year to year. I think what we probably have, it's been less easy to pinpoint, is those kinds of team improvements from year to year. And while individual defensive play is certainly a part of it, and guys can get better there, how these guys start to gel as a unit on that end is really going to make or break how next season goes.
So let's stay here and let's talk defense then, because I want to get into lineups and I want to get into expectations and all of that. But defense is going to be the foundation. I mean, this team is going to score. We know Tom Crean teams can score points, and especially with this much talent, that's not going to be an issue. So let me lay out a couple of reasons why I think there is some reason for optimism that the defense will be better. Certainly having Thomas Bryant back there as a guy who can protect the rim, which we didn't really have last year very much, I think should help. And obviously now you have more depth in the back line, where a guy like Honor can come in and play more 10-15 minutes as opposed to 25-30, which I think is helpful. And so just the size down low will help. But I think that the impact of Thomas Bryant is overrated if we don't pressure the ball more, because that was really, everybody talked about the lack of the rim protector, but we didn't have a perimeter protector. I mean, there was no resistance at all on guys dribbling the basketball. And so, I was really, and I put this in the email that I sent out a couple days ago, that, when you listen to James Blackman talk about the reasons he came back, the NBA guys really told him that he has got to be able to defend better. And I wonder, obviously with Troy, if you watch a game of his, the effort is there, the activity is there, but he gets lost a lot on defense and isn't a great individual defender. I have to think that the NBA folks told him the same thing, because if he's going to be in the Scottie Pippen mold, which is what people kind of compare him, his best case scenario to, like being a poor man's Pippen in the NBA, playing that type of role, clearly his defense has to get better. So I'm just wondering if some of these guys getting a wake-up call with, just the constant barrage of criticism they took for horrible, embarrassingly bad defense last year, and then some of the team leaders hearing it from the NBA scouts, this is what they need to do to get to the next level, that gives me some hope that combined with the better down-low presence, this team, I think, Andy, you had a great word for it, can play tolerable defense. Because, I think certainly if you want to win a national championship, that defense needs to improve from tolerable to good to possibly great. I'm okay with expecting baby steps right now, and maybe the defense becomes good to great later in the season, but that's what gives me optimism. So, Ryan, I'll go to you, and then Andy, too. Are there any other reasons for optimism, or am I also overlooking some glaring reasons that we just shouldn't feel good about the defense getting better?
Well, first of all, you're right about the ball pressure, and that was an issue last year. We didn't force a lot of turnovers, and a lot of that relates back to the fact that we just weren't pressuring the ball. Guys weren't getting out on players on the wings, away from the ball, or anything like that. But I think that a lot of that did have to do with a worry about being driven on and not having somebody back you up behind you. And I think that a rim protector allows you to really push out and pressure more defensively. Now, that's not going to solve everything, as you said. It's going to help, and it might help the team's mentality. I think more than anything, it'll help the mentality that, hey, if I make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. I've got some help. You've seen guys like Willie Cauley-Stein for 3 years at Kentucky erase mistakes constantly on a team that wasn't particularly great defensively as far as on-the-ball defense. They just had great length and great recovery ability. And so that really does help you, and it also helps the team, as I said, the attitude of the team to, all right, well, if I gamble here, we're not going to necessarily lose. And so I think that you look at guys like Troy, you're right. If he wants to be a Scottie Pippen may have been the greatest off-ball defender in NBA history. If he wants to be a guy who gets drafted and brought along as that, he's got to become way more aware on the defensive end. And from what I've heard about what James Blackman was told by scouts, it was not sugar-coated. It was very straightforward. Look, dude, you got to guard the ball. You have to be able to guard the ball. And like you said, he had better take that to heart. I mean, we don't know what's going to go on in these guys' minds in the offseason. Just because they were told by scouts doesn't mean that they're going to, execute that plan. But you've got to feel good, as you said, about them getting those reality checks. And I think guys like Robert Johnson and Emmett Holt and guys like that, who are usually in pretty good position already defensively, will improve as well, just footwork and things like that. Colin Hartman seems to always be in the right place defensively. He's got physical limitations, but he seems to always be in the right place. I think that this is a group that if, as you said, in the summer you're typically building up individuals, in the fall you build a team, but if these guys are spending a lot of time together, playing a lot of scrimmages against each other and things like that, you'll see the defense improve if it's a focus. And obviously it needs to be a focus. I mean, that's the biggest question moving forward, is how will they defend next year, because we'll score points.
Mm-hmm. Andy, let me lead into you talking by just doling out some numbers. So if you look at Tom Crean teams at Indiana, last year we were 214th in defense. In 2014 we were 47th. This is adjusted defensive efficiency. 2013 we were 28th. Obviously that's been the high watermark for Indiana under Crean. In 2012, 84th. 2011, 2010, 2009, 143rd, 185th, 177th. If you go back to his teams at Marquette, Crean's last three teams at Marquette were 27th, 36th, and 67th in defense. And then the 3 years before that, 142nd, 189th, 119th. And that team that was 119th, that was 2013. That's the team that made the Final Four. So that's just to kind of give the overview here of Crean's defensive numbers, which, do tend to jump around a little bit. And obviously last year was the worst, so let me ask you this, Andy, and maybe you don't know, but is there any precedent for a team going from 214th one year to playing Elite Eight Final Four level defense the next year, which you would think Notre Dame at 102 this year has to be about the floor for that? But that's still a pretty huge improvement from one season to the next. I didn't have time to crunch all the numbers to see if that's possible, but do you know of any off the top of your head?
No, I don't know of any. I saw you threw that question out earlier today. I didn't get a chance to look at it, but it seems what strikes me as odd about that is that if you saw a jump like that, my guess would be you would see a significant change in personnel, which is the exact opposite of what we have here. I mean, obviously, Bryant coming in will be a big factor there, but that's the part that becomes hard. It's like, it's one of those things where like everybody's back. I feel like I do this with IU in football with the defense. Like, oh, well, 10 guys are back on the defense. I'm like, well, 10 guys are back on the defense that sucked. So how does that make you? Does that really make you feel better? Or so it strikes me a little bit that way. So I don't know. My guess would be large jumps like that would be accompanied by some at least relatively significant roster changes, but it's probably something that's worth looking into. So that, I guess, if I kind of piggyback on what you guys said, that's the thing that concerns me is these guys. It's the same guys who struggled with this in the past that we're now asking to do something different. And it isn't that they didn't show flashes of it, but to be able to sustain that and be a bit more consistent on that end, I think is going to be important. I think equally important will be just figuring out what this team wants its defensive identity to be. I know it sounds cliche. We spent a lot of time talking about why are we switching defenses in the middle of possessions, and get guys to play man defense and really try to master that or get better at that before you start throwing these other things in. So I think if they can go through and really work on that and that becomes their identity or their footprint or whatever you want to say, you can maybe add some things on top of that. But, it's kind of the jack of all trades, master of none, where, you can throw out as many defenses as you want, but if you can't play any of them well, I'm not really sure what that does for you. So definitely would like to see the ball pressure get a little bit better. Galen Clavio has been posting some old IU games from the early 90s on YouTube, and my wife looked incredulously at me as I got really excited to watch like an early 90s IU Purdue game. But The thing that struck me about that when I watched it defensively is like the ball pressure was just amazing. Those were Chris Reynolds, Jamal Meeks years, and even Lyndon Jones was a really good defender on that team. And just the amount of ball pressure that they put as soon as the other team came across half court, they didn't press, they didn't do whatever. But things like that. While there are certain things from those teams that probably don't translate very well. But, there was no rim protector on that team. It's not like Eric Anderson was standing back there to block shots or Matt Nover was going to block shots. But they got a lot done with that kind of ball pressure. And I think that's something where even if you went back and looked at film, to me, that's the kind of thing that translates. A lot has changed about the game, but those kinds of fundamentals and things like that would, to me, stand the test of time pretty well. So now that I got that out of my system, I don't know. It's cool. It's cool to watch those games because for a lot of different reasons. But I just that was one thing that really struck me. Although, admittedly, I'm probably more attuned to that after watching this team's defense last season.
Well, I just thought of something. We should, whenever Galen releases one of those, we should do a post-game show for it. Like, we should watch it. And then how much fun would it be to do a post-game show for a win over Purdue where Greg Graham goes 26 of 28 from the free throw line? Like, isn't that amazing?
What about, like, the 1940 national championship? Look here, see? It was a heck of a game. I want to say,
awesome.
before I, completely make an ass of myself, which is too late. But, no, I want to say that the one thing that Crean's teams at Marquette were known for was high ball pressure. I mean, he had a lot of very talented guards while he was there. He would get athletic guys who were really strong in their upper body and a little bigger. Remy Abel, I talked about it, was sort of the mold of the guards he had at Marquette. They were excellent at pressuring the ball. I remember sitting in Maui, and I'm going to drop a name here, so I hope I don't hurt my foot. But I was sitting there talking to in Maui the year before Crean came to IU, when Marquette was there, and they were set to go up against Duke in the championship game. And I asked Billis what he thought the difference in the game would be. He said Marquette's ball pressure. He's like, they're going to pressure Duke's guards, and they're going to turn the ball over, and Marquette's going to win. And we sat there and talked about it for like 25 minutes, and he kept referring back to ball pressure, ball pressure, ball pressure. Crean's so good at teaching that. They're always, pressuring the ball. And it's so funny because that has been the biggest complaint during his tenure at IU, I think. And I don't know if it's just the guys he's getting or what. I mean, he's recruiting them, so it's on him, obviously. But that is something he excels at or used to excel at, and now it just has not really ever clicked. So I wonder if now – he's got the horses to do it. These guards aren't going to have physical limitations like the ones a few years ago when we went to the Sweet 16. These guys all physically can do it. I mean, Yogi's a shorter guy, but he's only one guy. It's not like he and Jordan Hulls are back there together. These are guys who are bigger, stronger, more athletic than the last time they had a team that could make a run. So maybe it'll be different. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it is. Our lack of ball pressure is not – I can see when you have Jordan Hulls and a Verdell Jones and guys like that, they don't have great foot speed. They don't have great quickness. I really didn't think last year was about athletic ability. I mean, Yogi's extremely athletic. Robert Johnson is. We saw James Blackman Jr. in that Northwestern game in the Big Ten tournament play really good defense and look active and look quick. So, and again, I do think part of it is you're doing all of this defensive switching and guys are maybe thinking too much instead of reacting, and that can slow you down a little bit. So, whatever it is, it's not one thing. There's clearly a lot of improvement that needs to be made. So, I term how I feel about this season guarded optimism because while it's easy to run, to kind of let the optimism run rampant, when you think, okay, this is still a team that was 214th in D, and Andy, like you said, with a lot of the same guys back, hopefully an addition like Thomas Bryant is big, hopefully an offseason of maybe mental shift and maybe Crean has a better ability to get the guys to focus in on it during the season because of everything that's happened. We'll see, but it's going to be what dictates this team's ceiling. You want to jump in again real quick, Ryan?
Yeah, I just want to say that, and as much as we're talking about players needing to focus in the offseason, and I know you guys touched on it as well, it's just as much on the coaching staff. I mean, and I'm sure, and they know that. This isn't like we're telling them, well, your defense was terrible. You should probably work on that. They know that, and that's going to be that has to be the main focus. I think strength training and for all the guys to just take that next step physically and also to figure it out defensively. I mean, this team has to band together and do something. They have to figure it out.
All right, so let's talk about expectations. So I sent out a tweet and asked everybody, what will it take for the 2015-16 season to be turned a success? The general consensus was one that I agreed with. So before I reveal that, let me get your guys' perspective on it. Andy, yours first. I mean, I know it's a little bit difficult and there can be extenuating circumstances, but as you sit right now and you kind of peer into the future and kind of see yourself, obviously a national championship would be clearly successful, but what's kind of the minimum that would leave you at the end of the season, you think, saying to yourself, okay, you know what, this was a good step forward, this was a good successful season, I'm feeling better about things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious to see what other people said. I saw you tweeted that out, and I know other people have been having that discussion, so I've tried to think about an answer, and I don't know that I have a great one. I guess to me, if you look at regular season play from a Big Ten perspective, I think the top three teams in the conference. I think you've got, Maryland, who's pretty highly thought of. They, bring in some good recruits. Also lose Deswells. They're up there. Michigan State's, they got Swanigan from Indiana going there as a big guy coming in, and then they've got Harris, a transfer from West Virginia, who I think will help them a lot scoring wise, and Denzel Valentine will still be there. So I think they should be really good. And then Michigan has pretty much everybody back, and if their big guys develop, I think they can be really good. And then you can throw Wisconsin in there because there's really no reason to believe that despite massive roster turnover that they're not still going to be really good there. So I think you've got a number of good teams. The conference is shaping up to be really good and potentially get as many bids as to the tournament as they did this year, with Purdue being pretty strong again. Illinois I think is shaping up to be pretty good. So. But I would like to think, with given the amount of guys returning, that top 2 or 3 finish in the Big Ten, and I think tournament-wise, I guess I would lean toward Elite 8. Sweet 16 certainly doesn't seem like enough. I don't know if Final Four is realistic, but I think it's funny. I feel like I bring up these parallels a lot, but living in Cincinnati, there's a lot of talk about the Bengals, and I feel like they're kind of in similar boats. And one of the radio hosts here was talking, I think it was last week, about they're trying to go with some slogan for the Bengals season, and he wanted it to be no more excuses. And I thought it was probably an apt one for this team as well. It's not, oh, we don't have a big guy. It's not, we're young. It's not whatever. Okay, this is, this team has come together, and I think we can, either tonight or other times talk about what that might mean long term. But if you look at the, if you kind of focus the lens on this season, it is no more excuses time. There shouldn't be a reason that this team, there aren't reasons this team can't achieve great things, and I think that's that's kind of how I view the season coming into it. Whether Elite 8 and top 2 or 3 finish in the Big Ten is even enough at that point, or if I've kind of tempered expectations based on the way other things have gone, I don't really know. But I guess that's my at least gut answer to the question.
Ryan, what about you? 20 wins, will that do it for you?
Not this year. I think I've said that the last 2 years. But no, I think that this year, I think the goal should always be to win the Big Ten. I think that if you look beyond that in the tournament, look, obviously you always want to go to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, year in, year out. You want to go to the Sweet 16. That's sort of like, no matter what your team looks like, that's your baseline, for a big program like this. But I think it's also hard to look beyond that. Not saying that I don't want this team to make the Elite 8, make the Final Four, but as we've learned several times in the past decade or so, a lot has to go right to win a national championship. A lot has to go right to make the Final Four. You've got to get extremely lucky. Your draw, things like that, just have to work out for you. It's not playing well, and it's not necessarily the talent you have. It has a lot to do with luck. And I mean, look at this year. If Kentucky runs into Wisconsin in the final, or what if Duke and Wisconsin had played in the Final Four and not in the final? Maybe Kentucky goes and Kentucky matches up better against Duke. I think Kentucky beats Duke. So a lot of it has to do with how you wind up and things like that. I think the goal every year should be to win the Big Ten, and I think that's the baseline for a successful season that people will look at and be proud of. I think you can, if you don't win the Big Ten, you can still have a successful season, but I think that's the goal for this team, and that should be the goal every year. Win the Big Ten. Hopefully some things go your way as far as seeding and all that stuff, and you got a chance to make a run in the tournament. But I think the Big Ten is always the focus, and it should always be the focus of this program.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Big Ten part. I'm going to strongly disagree with you on what you said about the NCAA tournament here in a second. I will say the kind of the consensus of the assembly call folks on Twitter was a top three finish in the Big Ten because some of that can depend on scheduling and if, a few things go your way. The goal, of course, is to win the Big Ten, but the Big Ten, Maryland's good, Michigan State's good. There's some good teams up there, so. But combined with the consensus really seems to be Elite Eight because, and here's where I disagree with you, Ryan, because you're right. In any single season, a bad matchup can derail you in the tournament, all right? And so you can't, in any single season, you can kind of talk that away. Like in 2013, who was one of the matchups Indiana didn't want? Syracuse. They got them. You lose in the Sweet 16, and that sucked in so many ways. But at some point, you've got to it's got to break. You have to break through. There can't be these excuses. And so I think now in year 8 of the Tom Crean era, with a lot of good recruits and a lot of optimism and a lot of expectations, the Sweet 16 is still ceiling. And that's why I think even if this team has a good regular season, gets in the Sweet 16, and even if it's a bad matchup that we can all talk ourselves into, like, okay, this was reasonable to lose, I still think people walk away from the season feeling empty and feeling incomplete because it wasn't a step forward. And I think for it to be that step forward, it's going to have to be an Elite Eight. And again, maybe now you don't make it to the Final Four because of that tough matchup, but I just think now with Yogi back and with all of these expectations and with what's happened in the program so far, that to me is where the bar seems to be set with most fans. And I tend to agree. If Crean had a couple Final Fours in his back pocket at IU, then maybe with a team like this, you get upset in the Sweet 16, okay. But I think now it's time, with so much building toward this season over the last 2 seasons that have been roller coasters and frustrating, there needs to be a payoff for all that. And that's how Crean is recruited and how he's built this program, that a lot is going to be riding on this season. And so. If you want to rebut, go ahead. But I think there's going to be no excuses, certainly in the Big Ten, become tournament time, and I don't think you're going to be able to explain away, anything before the Elite Eight. I just don't think you're going to be able to explain that away to matchups this year.
Yeah, no, and I actually agree with what you're saying. I guess what I was saying is I'm not looking forward ahead past the Big Ten. I just because, it's just hard to predict what's going to happen.
But it's April. It's fun.
I agree. I mean, look, I would say the Elite Eight has to happen if you want to talk about program progress. I think you're right there, and I think the consensus is right there. As for what I think the goal of the team should be and the focus of the team right now and during the season, it's Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten. And then, look, we're going to get our seed, we're going to find out where we're playing, and then we're going to go. And, yeah, you want them to get to the Elite Eight minimum. I think that anything other than that's going to be a disappointment. But I think that going into the season, we shouldn't be talking about national championship, Final Four, any of that, because that's not the focus. That's not what we're worried about right now. We're worried about let's get back to the top of the Big Ten. As far as my prediction, though, I think, top 3 of the Big Ten is almost, given the status of the other teams and what we're looking at. I mean, I think Michigan was a fiery pit of disaster this year, and I think that that's bad momentum going into next year. They're going to have talent, that's for sure, but it's just such a bad taste in their mouth from this year. I think Purdue's going to take a step back. I think Swanigan is a very nice player, but I think he's overrated going to Michigan State. I think they're losing a lot. They'll still be good. Don't get me wrong. Tom Izzo will figure it out, make it work. But I think that IU is in a very good place. I mean, Diamond Stone going to Maryland was a huge pickup for them. So I think that they're going to be tough to beat. I think that, and I also think that Ohio State's going to take a little bit of a step back. They could be okay, but they're not going to have D'Angelo Russell, and he was their go-to guy this year, and that's a big change to get rid of. So I really think this team is positioned very well. I think it's sitting with Maryland at the top of the conference, and then you can never count out Michigan State. I think those are the 3 teams.
Yeah, so I've got a couple potential negatives that I want to hit, but before we get there, and these are negatives that could maybe derail the good feelings that we're having right now. Let's talk real quick about lineup and rotation, because I think everybody's excited about that. I think we know Yogi, James Blackman Jr., Troy, and Thomas Bryant are going to be starting. There's debate about whether it'll be Robert Johnson at other spot or Colin Hartman. I can really go both ways on that one. Robert Johnson, one issue this team may face this year is guard depth. because and specifically ball handlers. And so, so I think you can make that argument that letting Robert come in off the bench, spell Yogi, although Yogi tends to play 40 minutes, so maybe that's not that big of a concern. But have a ball handler off the bench. I think Colin Hartman is a guy who really moves the ball well, could really operate well with that the starting five, not really needing the ball in his hands or needing plays run for him to be productive. So that's, it's an interesting question. I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. I think it'll be something that may shift as we go throughout the season. But my guess is that Robert Johnson starts out the season in the starting lineup, especially with the focus on getting more defensive ball pressure, and then Colin Hartman's your sixth man. And then you've got a bench with Emmett Holt and with Hunter Mosquera-Perea and with Nick Zeisloft and someone, maybe Juwan Morgan, Devin Davis if he comes back. So, it seems like there's a lot of options. Which also, Andy, as you know from tracking substitutions, a lot of options isn't always the best thing. So give me your opening thoughts just on what you think the starting lineup will be or should be, and then how you see the rotation kind of shaking out.
Yeah, I mean, a team that Crean could talk himself into playing, 11, 12 guys a night is like my own personal hell, I would say, at this point, in terms of having to stay up and do lineup analysis after the game. So that keeps me up at night for sure. But I guess I would slide a little bit the other way, and part of it is, with the guard depth. I mean, I would kind of like to see Hartman there. I think one of the things we talked about last year was really from a help defense and just defensive awareness perspective that he was really one of the guys that you could point to last year that had a good feel for what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. And so I think him another off season of rehab, another off season removed from the knee surgery. We talked a lot last year about what his sweet spot was in terms of minutes, and we quickly surpassed that, I think, as time went on, because he just had to play more minutes, whether it be the Perea injury, other guys not playing well. There were just a lot of reasons that he needed to play more than he was probably capable of at the time. And I think, you spin that forward to this year, I think that becomes a bit less of an issue. And I think, to be able to play a bit more of a conventional lineup, he can stretch or spread the floor, by being able to, step out and make shots. And still be able to open things up for Troy. I think he gives you, a lot of those things. But I do think there will have some matchup flexibility that they didn't really have last year, where it was very much if we can force the other team to adjust to what IU is doing, then so be it. But there really weren't a lot of ways to match up with what other people were doing. And I think Johnson is a guy who, can spell Yogi for longer periods of time off the bench, can handle the ball pretty well, and give him some defense, and maybe he, occasionally is in the starting lineup. So I don't know that you can go wrong in either of those cases with that, kind of, I'd have to think the starters come from, 5 of those 6 guys, and then you've got some depth at each position off the bench. But I think being able to have a couple guards come off the bench maybe is better, I guess, where, Johnson and Zeisloft really become your reserve guards, and both of them come off the bench. So I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer at this point. I would lean a little bit more toward playing Hartman, but can certainly understand an argument to go the other way.
Hey, admit it, you're going to miss Stan Robinson.
That was I think we both will. I think people probably got tired of us trying to take up for him, so I guess now that will be one less thing that we'll need to do. But it was with the renewed focus on defense, maybe something could happen. But hopefully things work out for him, and definitely can't blame him, I don't think, at this point for going in a different direction.
No. All right, Ryan, your thoughts on lineup rotation issues?
Yeah, I think you're going to see the same 3 guys at the guard spot, since we basically run 3 guards, 2 forwards. This year, Bryant's more of a center than we've had in the last couple of years, but I think you're going to see Johnson, Blackman, and Yogi out there at least to start the season, barring injury. And then I think you're going to see, of course, Troy is going to be your sort of swing wing, which is like a kind of like a forward who can't make a jump shot, I guess, he's more of a small forward driver, and then you'll see Thomas Bryant at center. But I think that you're going to start to see some things where a second unit might have Robert Johnson running the point. Whenever Yogi does come out, you're going to see him running the point. You'll see Zeisloft at the off-guard spot. I think that OG Anunoby will be this year's Max Hotzel, where he may not play for 3 games, then he'll come in and randomly get 15 minutes if he's playing well. That guy is an athletic terror, and he's a heck of a defender too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think he's going to get his feet wet next year, and then I think they're going to rely on him in the year after. But as far as the post goes, I don't think you're going to see Colin Hartman down in the front court much this year, just because we'll have more depth. It'll be Bryant. Perea will probably be the first one off the bench, and then you'll see Juwan Morgan certainly getting time. Gives you more fouls, gives you more flexibility down there. I mean, Hartman might, if you're running a wacko zone down there or something, in the preseason or in the non-conference season to try some different things. But
what zone do we run that couldn't be described as a wacko zone?
I was going to try and avoid talking about it because I thought it might shorten my life by 2 years. But but I think that Hartman, could, if they decide to go with a 5-out stretch, run for 5 minutes in a game or something, you could see him guarding down there. But I just don't think that's going to be necessary this year as it was this year. So you're definitely going to see these freshmen come in and make an impact. Like I said, I think Anunoby has a super high ceiling and is a really fun guy to watch. I think the crowd will definitely sort of fall in love with him early, but I also think he'll be the kind of guy who you may not see for a few games, and then he'll come out, make some plays, go back on the bench, and he's just behind some other talented guys, and there's no problem with that. He's going to eventually make an impact. So, yeah, I pretty much agree with you guys, though, on the front end of the rotation. I think the second unit, I think Johnson will start, and then the second unit will be he and Zaislav at the guard spots with Hartman mixed in there and getting some time. So, we'll see. I think that this team has way more depth than we've seen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, Anunoby is interesting. I think you may be right that he's a guy, because I think he's a guy who could benefit from redshirting. I don't think it'll happen just because he is kind of raw. But I don't think that'll happen. So I think you're right. He may play every third or fourth game, and just if he's in and his motor's running high, then he can make some plays and do some things. It's as it always is, it's going to be interesting to see how the rotation plays out, what kind of maddening substitutions are made from game to game that drive us all crazy. But the hope is, of course, that, as you get into Big Ten play, you can start to, I don't know if shorten the rotation is going to be the right thing this season, but at least solidify it so guys know their roles. I think that's really important, is just guys knowing and understanding their roles. And I think on the good teams, you have that, and on other teams, you're kind of struggling to get it throughout the year. All right, so let me play devil's advocate for a second. Andy, I'll send this over to you. There's a whole lot of good feelings going on right now. Yogi's back. He's tweeting that he's not going to leave without a championship, and James is back, and Troy's back, and everything. Thomas Bryant is out helping the coaches recruit and doing all these things. Like, there's a lot of Hoosier spirit happening right now, just among the team, it looks like. But as we get into the season, you now have 3 players who clearly are looking ahead. I mean, they had 1 foot in, 1 foot out this offseason, decided to come back, but they clearly want to improve their stock at the next level. Thomas Bryant is a guy who has said he's going to stay for 2 years. We thought Noah Vonleh was going to too, but he's a guy as a top 20 recruit and with that kind of size that is certainly going to get looked at for as a potential NBA guy. You got a guy like Honor, who was a big recruit, started this year. His role is going to change. Emmett Holt, really started to come around. We'll see what his role is. So, and I say this to say, as we get into the season, if the team starts to face a little bit of adversity and we're not getting enough shots here and this isn't quite going, do you at all fear that personal agendas start to kind of take over? And, that's my fear with this team. There's a lot of optimism. It's well-founded optimism. And I think, what we don't know yet is what is the internal leadership of this team? What is the internal mettle? Clearly, I think that's going to be Tom Crean, in addition to teaching this team how to play defense, managing egos and agendas and navigating the team through inevitable issues that happen is going to be his biggest challenge. What confidence level do you have that is the kind of thing that maybe this team can get through and make them stronger, and that doesn't derail a potentially special season?
I think that's an interesting way to put it. I think along those same lines, one of my concerns, maybe less so about the personal agenda piece, is there's obviously all the things that have been surrounding the program for let's say last year, to the point where Fred Glass needed to come out and make a statement, backing Crean in the off season that was not well received by me or a number of others, just in the way that it came out and how that was handled. But the reality is you got to a point where you felt that that was necessary, and now all these expectations are there. And is it a case where at the first sign of trouble, people are really going to start to panic, and those those things just get louder and louder? And is that something the team can overcome? Because I thought really, at points last year they really struggled to just overcome all the things swirling around the program as well, of what's going to happen with the coach. Is he going to be back? They've lost all these games in a row. Are they going to make the tournament? Are they going to do whatever? They certainly didn't excel in those scenarios, and things snowballed a little bit. So in a season where the expectations are much higher, to start, and any little thing is going to be perceived as an issue and get potentially blown out of proportion, as things are wont to do with IU basketball. I think that part of it concerns me, and I do think just Crean's tendencies, personality, whatever you want to say, I don't know that it lends itself well to the calming influence where that you might like to see in those scenarios. So I do think it's a concern, based on what we've seen from him, what his personality is, and the way the team reacted a bit when things started to not go their way last year. And again, I go back to, it's the same group of guys that didn't respond all that well to those scenarios. They kind of banded together a little bit in the Big Ten tournament when their backs were against the wall. But in general, when things started to go bad, things just got worse. And so, you're another year older, and you have that experience to fall back on, and I do think guys will be able to learn from that. But it's definitely something that I think you can't help but be at least have your radar up for as you head into the season.
Ryan.
Yeah, I think that this is probably going to be Crean's biggest job in the off season, and especially early in the season, is getting this team to buy into the fact that, hey, you guys were all superstars in high school, or Yogi, you were first team All Big Ten, all this, but you got to buy into the team concept, and like him or not, that's one thing I have to admit, and I sincerely don't like him, but that is one thing that John Calipari did this year that I found amazing, was he got all of those stars to buy into, I don't care about my points, I don't care about my rebounds, I don't care about my minutes, let's win games. And they were wildly successful. And I mean, let's face it, that team came closer to going undefeated than anybody since the 76 Hoosiers. So I think that's the model he has to set up. I mean, we obviously aren't going to have that level of talent, but you've got to tell these guys, look, as long as you win and as long as you perform well, regardless of your points, your minutes, blah, 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 those guys at the next level are going to notice, and that team proved it. That team this year from Kentucky proved that it's not necessarily, and teams will see if you're ball hogging or if you're being, just wanting to get isolated and do your own thing. Teams are going to notice that more than they'll notice a 25-point outburst. So that's just his job, and is he going to do well at it? I don't know. We'll see. You don't really know how you're going to react until you're in that kind of scenario. So let's hope this team, I mean, it seems like the attitude of the players is sky high right now. Everybody is raving about Thomas Bryant, the way he acts around people and things, and he's the kind of guy that people gravitate towards, and he puts them at ease. And I think that this team probably needs that personality in the room, especially after, as Andy said, the pressure got on and those guys kind of broke down at times last year. We need that sort of uplifting personality around, and it helps that it's a big guy, of course, and somebody who was coming in with the right attitude. And then you look at guys like Juwan Morgan. Remember when all the troubles happened before the season? Juwan Morgan was saying, "I'm more excited to get in there now because I want to change the culture and I want to help this team, get better." And so I mean, that's just stuff you've got to deal with as it comes. And will Crean be good at it? I don't know, but I think that these players know what the expectations are, and I think that I hope at least that they're mature enough not to get buried by those expectations.
I think it was Jeff Rabjohns who echoed something similar that you said about Thomas Bryant and his personality, his gregarious personality, and compared him to Victor Oladipo, actually, which is high praise, but just talked about how having a guy like that in the room could be helpful. So that's an important point. And I should say, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on individuals here. It's more just casting aspersions on human nature, and especially the human nature of 19, 20, 21-year-olds who, if we all think back to how we were back then, not a lot of us had the perspective of big picture thinking a lot of times. And so, these guys are looking toward their future, as they should be, and so you just, you want to make sure, Ryan, like you said, that they understand that actually staying focused on the team, even when things aren't quite going well, even when they're not getting as many shots as they may want, or this, that, or the other's not happening, it's still better in their long term to buy in totally to the team, and that is the job of the coach. So, that if that doesn't happen, I think that's going to be Crean's biggest job, like we said. And so I think it's something I know is going to be in the back of my mind the entire season, just as a worry. And we'll have to see when the when the adversity hits, how does this team deal with it? Ryan, did you want to jump in? Do you have anything else to add on Bryant?
Oh yeah, I just want to say about his personality, and everybody's raving about it. But at the same time, from personal experience, when you have somebody in a room who can diffuse tension in a bad moment, or just kind of pick guys up when they're down and things like that, that's just, it's worlds changing. It's just a completely different outlook and attitude, and it really can help. It's something that gets tossed aside as, well, it's just whatever, he's a goofy kid. No, that kind of stuff really does help, and Victor proved it. That Victor led that team, and he wasn't a senior, and so I think that's important, and I think maybe it's a personality we don't have on this team.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this now. And I was actually just in a conversation with some folks about this before we came live on the air. And I think this is going to be – I think you're going to see two sets of Indiana fans this year. And you always see this happen, or at least you've seen this the last couple of years. I think it's going to be even more acute this year. I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. So on the one hand, you have people like us at the start of the show, kind of reveling in the optimism and, hey, this has a chance to be a really special season, which it does, and getting excited, talking about expectations. And obviously we're going to be, rooting for the team every game and coming on here, breaking them down, being invested, and hoping that the team is successful. But you do have another subsection of fans, and they make really valid arguments, I will say, that it's possible that a really good season this year could actually not necessarily be in the best long-term interests of the program, because a lot of what this team is built on, this roster is built on kind of a house of cards where, you kind of hit this home run with Thomas Bryant that people didn't expect. You had three guys come back, and so a roster that looked like it could have really been in flux from kind of some manic, maybe not necessarily well planned out recruiting and roster management came together, and it looks great. But is this really something we can duplicate? Is this really a program, or is this just a good team? And Galen Clavio is one of the guys I was talking about with this. I'm sure he doesn't mind me, attaching his name to those thoughts, because that's something he's been talking about, and he makes valid points. And for me, it's very hard to disengage, on a single season level, and not get caught up in the individual season. And so I get these big picture thoughts, but I know that my mindset is going to be over here, for better or worse, for the long term in the program. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on that. How do you view it? Do you think there's valid arguments over here for the fact that a good season this year could be fool's gold and set us up, for more of the roller coaster? Because even if there's a really good season this year, think about the 2 years that preceded it to get here. And is there always going to be these 2 or 3 years of roller coaster frustration before we kind of have this really good season again, and then it's back down, and then it's really good? At what point is there stability? So I get the arguments on both sides, and I think you're going to see them, like I said, become more acute and maybe even more polarizing this season, especially when the adversity hits. Andy, what do you think about that? Where do you see those as both two valid takes, and where do you stand on it?
I definitely see them as valid points, because the one thing when you start talking about program level versus the season, that's kind of why some of those expectation comments to me are that we talked about earlier are really hard to gauge. For an individual season, as you mentioned, if you had I guess maybe this is the Fred Glass approach, though, because you're not supposed to remember what happened the last 7 years, because that doesn't matter, right? We learned that in the off season. So despite those seasons not existing, well, let's look back at them, shall we? I mean, to me, program success is the ability to sustain it from year to year. And while you may have, a blip here and there, I think we would all say that where this team was even a couple years ago and the way that we felt after the, seasons that ended in 2012 and 2013 ended up, it felt like the whole, we're back, concept and all that. And then what happened since then? They were unable to sustain it. They played really poorly in the 2014 season, and last year was a pleasant surprise. But I think at that point, 2 years earlier, you say I don't want to be pleasantly surprised. I just want to be, I want them to be meeting expectations and having higher expectations than what they've seen. And so, if next year is better, I don't know that anything we've seen gives you any great, confidence that they'll be able to sustain that level. And that's where, you talk about that. You talk about all these, and I thought this is where you're going with this question earlier, where you've got all these guys who have decided to come back, and you got more into like the personal agenda piece. To me, the thought is most, if not all of the guys that you mentioned, at least at the top of that piece, are not going to be back. I mean, Yogi clearly is not going to be back. He's going to be gone. I think it's reasonable to assume that if Troy has a season, similar to what he had last year and shows some improvement, that he would leave. Bryant, I know we've talked about, is a 2-year guy. Again, thought that with Vonleh, it's potential that he's gone. You lose, Zysloff, who's going to be an important shooter off the bench, and who knows what happens with Blackman. So what are you doing at that point? Are you really reloading? And it's too early to look at that from a recruiting standpoint and feel good or bad about who they might have coming in to replace those guys. But then are you back in the cycle of, well, we're a really young team again, and it's going to be whatever it is. So do you have to put so many of your eggs in the basket of this season in the same way that everybody did, and then got crushed by the Syracuse loss, because then it became apparent of, can they really sustain what they're doing? And so that to me is what I guess concerns me, is have we really seen steady growth, or has it just been all over the place? Because even when you look back at it, if you throw out the first season, you look from season 2 of the Crean area, they had 10 wins. Season 3, they had 12 wins. I mean, at that point, that's really not a big jump at all in what was going on. Then you jump up to 27 and 29, then back down to 17. Now you're back up to 20, which is good. So are you on the upswing again? You've been a little bit all over the place, and even I think some of that was true with Crean's Marquette teams, where he had great teams that were kind of like this confluence of events. Dwayne Wade being one, and some of the other good teams where he had a set of veteran guards, and then when those guys were ready to leave is really when he came to IU. And so how do you continue to build on that? And I guess I don't know that we've seen enough to say, if they have a great season this year, that the bottom's not going to fall out when personnel things don't go the right way and guys leave and there aren't the right pieces there to back them up. So I do think it's a reasonable argument. It's hard to, in some ways, and I think I like to think we do a decent job of this, of still being able to get excited about the individual games. And even last year, you think about the first Maryland game, and some of the other big games that this team won. To me, you can still get excited about that and still have questions in the back of your mind that say, all right, well, this is great, but is what's happening here sustainable? I don't really know that the answer to that is yes. I think for some people that's harder to do, and I think it's fair to be frustrated and not feel like you can really separate one from the other. So it's I don't know. It's a delicate thing, and I think that's why I worry about what I said earlier, in the sense that if things start to go wrong, how loud is the noise at that point from everybody who's getting really frustrated with it?
Mm-hmm. Ryan, your thoughts on this?
Look, I get the complaints. I get the I get the Crean hasn't been able to win consistently, things like that. Totally understand it. Totally rational. Totally reasonable. The problem I have is, if right now, with Yogi announcing he's coming back, Blackman coming back, Troy Williams coming back, Thomas Bryant coming in and saying all these great things, saying he's going to stay. If you can't get excited as an IU fan, you're never going to be happy. I mean, look, these are the same people who were saying when we won the outright Big Ten title over Michigan, well, we got lucky, the ball rolled off the rim. Like, Did you see them just come back at the end of the? They made this like amazing 5-point comeback, and they're like, nah, Crean got lucky. Like, just be happy. Like, I don't get it, and I understand the worry about long-term sustainability, blah blah blah. But you're going to get to watch a top 15 team next year. We know that now. Get excited. The games are going to mean something. They're going to be fun. It's not going to be this, well, if everything comes together, they might be all right like it was this past year. No, this is going to be fun. And just allow yourself to kind of have fun. For the next 6 months, or whatever it is until the basketball finally tips off, Tom Crean's going to be our coach. Joking about it, arguing about it, yelling about his substitution patterns, things like that, that's all valid. But nothing's going to change in the next 6 months. Just enjoy the fact that we can look forward to a competitive team with some players who are really enjoyable as people and who we can get behind. And if you can't do that, then why are you even a fan? Why do you even watch? I mean, why? It's just you're making yourself miserable, and I don't get it. As far as long-term sustainability, all that stuff, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. If you had asked me in January of 2013 if Noah Vonleh was going to stay or go, I would have told you that I had been told that he was definitely staying and coming back. He changed his mind. But you've got guys. There is going to be some depth here, though. I mean, if let's say Yogi, Troy, James all leave after next year, like they talked about. Well, you've still got Robert Johnson, who I think is a 4-year player at IU, much like Yogi. You've got OG Anunoby, who I think has a super high ceiling. You've got Juwan Morgan, who will be back and is going to be a very talented, very good Big Ten starter, I think, eventually. And you've got Bryant, who I believe is a 2-year player. He's only 17 right now, and physically is not ready to take an NBA pounding. He is not built for that right now, and I think he's a 2-year player. I really do. And then, you've got other guys. You've got Hartman will still be around. You've got Emmett Holt. And, I mean, there's talent there. You're not going to lose 4 1,000-point scorers. So I just think, you know what? Right now, if you can't get excited and happy as an Indiana fan, stay home. Don't go to games. Don't, because you're going to be the guy who pisses everybody else off with your negativity. Just have fun. It's basketball. It's not life. You're not, nobody's going to die if we lose. So I just, that's what I think. I think that right now everybody should be excited. We look like we're going to have a really good team. You don't like the coach? Don't look at him. Look at the bench. I don't know. Look at other people. Just enjoy. Watch Tim Priller waving a towel. I mean, it's, So
yeah, I mean, and clearly I agree with your sentiment, Ryan. I mean, I'm not going to be just I won't be capable of not getting excited about this season and cheering for the team. In some ways, it's almost our reward for the purgatory of the last 2 years. It's felt like, but I can't agree with you on the whole stay home type thing. I mean, I think there are really valid points over here, and I think there are really dedicated, well-meaning fans who are afraid of, you said, in 6 months what happens. They're afraid in 2 years that there's still shifting expectations and, the bar is constantly changing. It's not a standard like Wisconsin or a standard like Michigan State, which is the goal and kind of what the promise was 7-8 years ago. So and I think that's the fear, is that no matter what happens at the end of this season, what do we really know? So, and I know we could go on like this, all night, and we're going to have plenty more shows this offseason. There's lots to talk about and break down. But we can't do it all in one night. So, been going for about an hour. We'll wrap this show up. You'll get final thoughts, Ryan, so you can say anything in your final thought. But let's wrap up for tonight, and then we'll start doing these regularly, because now that we know what the team's going to look like, we can actually have some substantive conversations. I think the goal tonight was more to kind of provide the overview and just, kind of revel in some excitement, but also point out some potential red flags on this team. So let's go to final thoughts, wrap up. Andy, you go first, then Ryan, and then I'll close things out.
I do think, when I look at what's happened so far, I don't think things could have gone any better at this point for IU in the offseason. I think that's certainly after obviously a long way to go in the offseason, but after the offseason of last year, having things go well is certainly a welcome change. So definitely no complaints from that perspective. And I think again, it sets there up to be at least some stability from a roster standpoint next year. Obviously, there's still going to be one more roster move to be made. They're oversigned by one at this point, so someone at some point this season, before the season starts, is going to end up not being back. But in general, roster stability of key players will be different this year than than some of what we've seen. So I think that's a positive, and I hope that is something that the guys can build on in the offseason. That the frustration they felt toward the end of the year and how the season ended, that they take some of that in addition to those individual things that they want to work on. To me, I guess I go back to the same thing as before. It's how this team develops, both from a chemistry standpoint, which I thought was pretty improved last year compared to what we saw the year prior. Can they continue to build on that? This guy like Bryant certainly seems like he's only going to enhance the good things that they have there, and so I think things are going as well as they possibly can at this point, and so we'll obviously see where they go from here. I did want to compliment you earlier on your perhaps unintended pun of guarded optimism when talking about the defense. So perhaps that's a good way to put it.
I think you threw in a Bottoms reference earlier too, so it's been a good day of unintended word usage there. All right, Andy. Hey, thanks for joining us, man. If you have to hop off, I know you've got a lot of work to do, so hop off. Or if you want to join us for the post-show conversation, which is always riveting, feel free to hang around. Ryan, your final thought for tonight's show.
I think first of all, one thing we haven't really done is give credit to the staff for this offseason. I mean, let's face it, the biggest recruiting jobs they had were convincing Troy, James, and Yogi to come back. I mean, that's they're not just recruiting future players; they got to recruit their own guys to stay. So, and also I've read some places that we kind of got Thomas Bryant by default, or he fell into our lap, or that is so incredibly false. This staff worked him very hard from the fall all the way through the spring. He was always going to be a spring signing, and he originally liked IU, but his mom was pushing Syracuse, and we all know that from her Twitter account, which is kind of absurd. That sentence, if somebody said that sentence 20 years ago, can you imagine how ridiculous it would have sounded? But we know that the preference from his mom was Syracuse, but he always loved IU, and the staff just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and they kept in contact, and they brought him in for a second visit, and they worked for that. And for people to act like, well, he just showed up on campus. No, that's not what happened. These guys put in a lot of work and really worked hard to get him. And he's a key piece. He's a central piece, and they sold him on being that central piece. So, I think you got to give Tipper, however many problems I may have with the staff, with Tom Crean, whatever, you've got to give him credit for that. They did a great job this offseason. They now have the team set, to be very good and be very successful. And to anyone out there, I mean, again, people are going to complain, people are going to whine about things, and that's fine, and you have valid concerns. And I was saying that before. You have valid concerns, and I'm not trying to. I was obviously going with some hyperbole. I'm not discouraging anyone from not showing up at Assembly Hall, but just at the first sign of trouble, don't jump off a bridge. It's basketball. These guys are going to work through their problems. They're not going to be perfect. They're 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. Just have fun. That's what this is, and try and have some fun with it. These guys are going to be good. They're going to be fun to watch. And they've got a lot of talent, and we could be looking at another Big Ten title next year. I mean, that's definitely within the realm of possibility. So it's great to, and also again, it's great to be back on the show. I know we've been gone for like a month now, but it's awesome to fire it up, and hope you guys all enjoyed it. And I have to say thanks to our fans who, since we last aired a show, have been pestering me on Twitter, and I'm sure you guys too. Is when were we going to do another one? Well, it's our off season too. We need a little break, but I actually really want to thank the people who do tune in all the time, and you guys are great and incredibly supportive, and we love hearing from you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the best thing to actually have people tweeting and saying when's the next show. It really feels good. So let's wrap things up here. I think the last thing I want to say is, I think if you've watched our show, you know that once the season starts, we get into it, we're into the games, and I think we spend the offseason doing more speculation and big picture and kind of tossing out, these red flags and kind of criticisms like we are tonight, because I think this is more the time to speak openly about it. And I just, I see the role of fans once the actual games start to be there 100%, and I know that sometimes that can feel, if you don't buy into the current regime, you feel like you're cheering for failure almost. I get it, and I guess I just, even if I see that logically, I can't do it, and so. I think everybody's gonna, views their role of fandom in their own way, and then obviously, and I think it's great that there are so many different ways to express that. But I think, where I stand, I think kind of where you guys stand too, is there are legitimate questions about the future of the program based on what we've seen in the past, and you can certainly wonder what next season will look like. But the thing is, this season, the one that's right in front of us, has a chance to be really special, and so. I plan on going into this season with that guarded optimism, but, frankly, I just can't wait to see this team play. Like, I'm really excited for Hoosier hysteria, for the first games to start, to see the guys play. And I always am, because I always am for a new season, but there's certainly something about knowing these players, having, watch Yogi play for 3 years and watch Troy play for a couple years, watching them grow. That still, to me, is the best part about being a fan, more than the wins and losses and the expectations and the championships. It's just watching the guys grow from their first day on campus to however long they're here. And so because that's kind of the most joy I get out of being a fan, even above the wins and losses, I can't, I guess, ever separate that and not just get immediately excited about the action on the court and how they're doing. So anyway, but it's, it'll be interesting, and we'll have a lot of these discussions as we go through the off season, and certainly when the season goes, we know it'll be, even if it's a good roller coaster, it'll be a roller coaster, because that's how college basketball is, and that's especially how Indiana is, which is always seems to be kind of an extreme example of college basketball. So either way, it's going to be a fun, interesting, compelling, exciting season, and we are going to be excited to go through it all with you, and to go through all the rest of the off-season shows that we have, which will be many. Go to assemblycall.com/subscribe. That's where we email you about new shows, also on Twitter. We have some other off-season stuff planned that I think you will like. So that's it. Thank you all very much for watching. Thanks for all your supportive comments, and we will talk to you all on the next special edition off-season episode of the Assembly Call. Talk to you soon, everybody.